To me, when I hear disruptive ethics without any explanation, I think about people being comfortable and then us disrupting that comfort. Because when you're uncomfortable, what do? If I'm uncomfortable in the seat, I'm gonna move, I'm gonna try to get comfortable. You move when you're uncomfortable. So when I look at that phrase, my abstract mind goes to, yes, shake it up. Disrupt it. Try to figure out what it is in that emotional being that thinks that it's okay to have the Confederate emblem in the Mississippi state flag. You're just so used to it. You're comfortable with it. Why? I don't feel comfortable with it. And let me disrupt your emotional train of thought and let you know how I feel and see if you can empathize with that and see if it makes you move a little bit, just to see.
Love that. That's awesome. What do you think about the phrase disruptive ethics?
So I'll start with just a sort of story that I think symbolizes, good for now, thank you, symbolizes that phrase. So we were working on an immigration campaign when I was out in California, and we were in Sacramento. We were meeting with legislators throughout the entire day, and we wanted them to pass the Trust Act. That was the campaign that we were working on. And there were a bunch of rabbis and congregants standing in a hallway, and one of them wearing a kippah, a yarmulke, and a senator walked by while they were speaking to their assembly member, and the senator said, "Rabbi," because of course anybody wearing a kippah is a rabbi, clearly. He said, "Rabbi, you here to talk about Israel today?" That's always the assumption. And he said, actually, we're here to make you guys feel encouraged to pass the Trust Act, get this through the legislature and get it onto the governor's desk this year. They had missed this 3 years in a row. And he was taken aback and he said, "Is immigration a Jewish issue?" And Rabbi Larry Rafael said, "Oh, we believe it is." Now, that to me is disruption, right? Because it's showing up with surprise, changing the story, changing what's expected, and getting people to move. I think, what made the people cross the sea? They were uncomfortable. They needed to be disrupted. You can sit in what's expected of you for only so long, and then it starts to hurt, and then you look in the mirror, and what everybody expects of you doesn't look like you anymore. And so you got to take some sort of action, and it's one thing to take the action, and then the disruption, I think, is to start talking about it out loud. That this might not be what you expect, but one day the norm is going to look a lot different than we think it looks now.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Great. What do you think?
I'm from the South, and Southerners are known for their hospitality. So I think about that in terms of what is ethical. And I think that a confusion can happen very easily between politeness, what is hospitable, what is ethical, and the definition of what is ethical. Because if you come from a culture of manners, right, there's a way to do something. If you don't do it that way, then there's a possibility or the assumption that you won't be heard. So for me, it is sort of taking that definition of what is ethical and saying that ultimately it is about what is moral. And even though I'm doing something in a way that makes you uncomfortable or doesn't feel polite to you, that doesn't mean that what I'm doing is not right and that it is not moral. Just because I'm not being mannered in the way that I say it does not mean that what I'm saying is not right. It doesn't mean what I'm saying is not moral. All through history, Martin Luther King was told, if don't do it that way. If you just sat down with us, if you just wait, it would happen eventually. Waiting is not an option in the face of injustice. So for me, ethics is not being polite, not being mannerable, not being hospitable, but being moral and being just, and finding those ways that you can cross those bridges that you may hurt somebody's feelings, but ultimately you are doing the right thing for the community.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Beautiful. Beautiful. What do you think, Charles?
It's interesting. Ethics I don't want to deal with. Disruptive I do.
Okay.
I think when you're talking about the South, I guess this is the Southern panel.
This is the Southern panel.
It's okay, you almost a lot more talent than I did too.
I grew up in South Carolina, and something just flashed in my head that I hadn't thought about for years. My class was the first class I went to an all-black school up until 9th grade, and then the schools merged, and there were all the requisite fights and busing and all those things. And my senior year, I won the Sons of the American Revolution Award, which was if you had the highest average. And they never had that issue before, and they didn't know what to do when I won this award. So the day of the ceremony, you know, I've always been one to say, what do you do? How do you change this situation? The leader of the Ku Klux Klan in my town was the head of the SAR. And he had to present the award to me in a ceremony. And I'm 18 years old and sitting on the stage. They call me to the stage. Everyone knows me, so they're all thinking, what is he going to do? Because I have no filter. And he walks on stage, and I just hugged him. And, you know, a newspaper, they put it in the newspaper. It was this whole thing, right, that I hugged him. But fast forward, I was the Grand Marshal of the Martin Luther King Parade, which I did not want to do and did for my mother. But we were going down the street of my hometown, and I looked over at the courthouse steps, and here was this man on the steps doing this to me. And I thought, that's disruptive ethics.
That's right.
That's how you shift someone's thought, their mindset.
That's good. So there is so much power on the stage, pulpit. These are some powerful people. And I want to give them space to tell you some of the things they've done by just kind of asking a starter question like, what you been doing? See how eloquent? What you been doing? Say it with me. What you been doing? We have a clip that we're going to show that Genesis gave us, and then she's going to say, what's she been doing?
The crowd had no idea what I was going to do. The promoters of the club had no idea what I was going to do.
Mississippi just named April's Confederate Heritage Month. They have the audacity to name April Confederate Heritage Month. I'm gonna show you how I celebrate that shit.
Speaking out on this issue wasn't an easy decision because I know the type of backlash that I would receive. I held the flag in one hand and I held a lighter in the next. The crowd started getting really excited, asking for me to burn it, but I chose not to, and instead I threw it out into the crowd.
Y'all rip this shit apart for me. Rip that shit apart.
Someone took a picture of me holding up the noose, draped in the flag, and the picture went viral. The response I got from that was harassment online, and there was a few calls to my phone. It was kind of scary at first, and although I do not fear the white supremacists who made threats against me, I do take the threats extremely seriously. But instead of hiding behind sheets, they're hiding behind fake avatars and profile pictures. I'm gonna get trolls anyway, so it might as well be behind something that I believe in and standing up for something that I believe in and standing up for people who don't have the voice and platform that I do.
She's been making some headlines lately, trying to, fix some things in her home state, Mississippi. Let's give it up for Genesis B.
Low key, I got time for saliva. Mississippi bred, hurricane survivor. Only if you knew about half of what I've been through, you would understand why I keep this sort of mental.
This protest that I did sparked quite a dialogue and debate because of the overwhelming amount of support and overwhelming amount of backlash that I received. It kind of forced people to take a side. A friend of mine who I grew up with since middle school is a supporter of the Mississippi state flag staying as is. Engaging online and comments and messages, that's cool, you know, to express, but there's nothing like looking somebody in the eyes and seeing the subtle nuances for them to be able to relate to you and for you to relate to them. So I just thought it was very important just to go back to Mississippi and speak to some of the people who I've engaged online or who have engaged me. Me being angry or yelling at them or them yelling at me, it's not going to solve anything, although at times that's what we want to do. We've lost the human connection aspect, and I think that's partly why we're in the situation that we're in with this Confederate emblem. That's why I chose to go back down. Yeah. It's amazing to watch that every time I see it. It's like, brings all the feels back. Yeah. The last thing I said, so this clip is from the Moral Courage Project, produced by Irshad Manji. It's a longer clip. I go back to Mississippi and they follow my journey back and take the conversations that I have with those with opposing views. And there's a beautiful conversation between myself and a Sons of the Confederate Veterans member who's my age. We grew up together.
How old are you?
30. Dirty 30.
30.
Yeah. And in this talk, there was a mutual respect before we went into this. No one raised their voice. There was nothing of that nature. He saw my point of view, I saw his, and he said on camera, you know what, if that flag was taken down, I could still honor my heritage. And he says, why should my wants and needs outweigh another? He said this. And I'm really hoping that this clip in this documentary goes viral and shows people how to get down to the human element, because that's what's been lost, is how do we connect face to face, like hop offline and have these real conversations. There's this phrase that I'm going around screaming up and down the block, you know, people, not things. People, not things. Thinking abstractly versus concrete. So as an artist, my mind is abstract. I'm thinking people in general, not things. I'm not thinking, oh, he's a Trump supporter, or he is a Confederate flag supporter. No, he's a person. He's a person who was a child once and has been indoctrinated and misinformed about something, and me telling him that he's wrong is not going to help anything. Asking him how he feels and then explaining how I feel, that's where empathy comes in. So if I'm going around hanging a noose around my neck and the Confederate flag, that's a very concrete thing that I just put out into the world, right? This is a visual that you can take and interpret like, okay, what is she saying? Is she saying that what this flag represents to her is decades and generations of brutality, where brown bodies are disposable, killed, oppressed? And that's how she's celebrating Confederate Heritage Month. So as an artist, my only job is as an artist, I'm just an exaggeration of my ideals. I am just an exaggeration of my ideals. So my job is to take my abstract thinking, these concepts of frustration, resentment, confusion, growing up as a child, but why? Why is that history? Why was my great-great-grandfather killed or murdered or raped or castrated? Why? That confusion grows into anger. It grows into frustration, resentment, and then finally something snaps. So my governor, Phil Bryant, says April will be Confederate Heritage Month, and generational trauma comes out in that way. That's what you're witnessing. A little clip of generational trauma, of me expressing that, is the best way that I know how to convey it as an artist. So as an artist, that is my only job. You can leave it at that. But as an activist, it's okay, we've disrupted something.
Yeah.
There's something that's been moved with this artistic expression. How do we capitalize on that and mobilize that, and take that movement and create some sort of change? And that's why I chose to go back to Mississippi after this went viral, to see how we can now activate the art. That's what I've been up to.
What you been doing, Steph? Besides making a beautiful baby girl?
Thank you. Well, that's actually taken up a great deal of time.
Can I ask a question? Could you explain what the Trust Act is?
Of course.
Please?
So first, I just want to say I'm really honored to be sitting here among such incredible artists and activists and people making change in the world. So thank you for inviting me. And it's always good to be at Middle, my church.
You're a rabbi, right?
So the Trust Act specifically is a piece of legislation that passed in California. It was up 3 years in a row, and it lost 3 years in a row. And it's basically the short story is that there's a piece of federal legislation called the Secure Communities Act. And secure communities, basically, it's a misnomer, obviously, but it says that if a person comes into contact with law enforcement and they get their fingerprints taken, since 9/11, those fingerprints were sent to the FBI. That's just for everybody everywhere. Since 2005, when Secure Communities passed, they would also send it to ICE. And then ICE would run those fingerprints and then fax the jail and say, that person is suspect, hold them, we're on our way. They would show up and then begin deportation, procedures. There's so many problems with that, including that a survivor of domestic abuse who calls, the police to come and help her or him, could then get caught up in a system where now their fingerprints end up in the system, and now they're deported, and they are deported away from their children who are in a dangerous situation as well. Or an immigrant without documents is, and your language of people, not things, right? They are people, they just don't have documents, right? That's I really hear what you're saying so deeply. Somebody gets pulled over for a broken taillight, or for selling food without a license, or for driving without a license, which they can't get. They will then be brought into the system, and listen, there's punishment for things that we do wrong, right? You sell drugs, there's some sort of punishment for that. The punishment for that should never be that you're ripped away from your family and sent to maybe a country that you've never been in before, or you left when you were a child, you don't know anybody. And so So what I was doing, the way we got involved in that campaign, was I was the director of Just Congregations, co-director at the time of a thing called Just Congregations, which is the community organizing arm of the Reform Jewish movement. And we started talking to our people in California. We built this campaign called Reform California, double entendre intended, to change California and also reform movement. And we started asking our people, what is the California that you dream of? And how did you come to that dream? And people talked about all sorts of things. These are the rabbis and also the Jews in the pews. And they talked about anything you could imagine. Education, because Prop 13 has so decimated the education system in California. They talked about immigration, health care, elder care, youth, just across the board, so many things. And we learned by reaching out to organizations and coalitions that had been doing this work long before we showed up at the table. So we learned from Endalon, the National Day Laborers Organizing Network, and we learned from PICO, which is a national organizing network, what they had learned. And this is part of what I wanted to sort of answer this question of what are we up to. We needed to figure out a couple of things. One, how do we as a mostly white population, that doesn't mean that we don't have folks of color in our congregations who are Jewish or who are married to white-looking Jews. But we had to figure out how do we show up humbly on issues where we are not the people who are most hit or hurt, but we are called to repair the world, and we're called to heal suffering, and we're called to actually address injustices in the world. So if we're going to be effective, then we need to be strategic. If we're going to be strategic, we need to be in partnerships with people who are the people whose experiences and their stories are actually what transform us and the world. And so when we got out there, we had to figure out how do you follow powerfully? Or we needed to bring something to the table. We can't just show up, be like, hey, you know, we've got some relationship with legislators, which we do, which they're sitting in our pews often. So instead of being ashamed of that or weird about that or awkward about that, let's bring that power to bear. Let's build some relationships with our elected officials and across lines of race, class, and faith so that we can show up for our brothers and sisters, with our brothers and sisters, not in a, let's help those vulnerable people over there, but like, let's get a horse in the race. Like we have something to offer. We also have pain and suffering where we experience these things. Actually, as it happened around the Trust Act, one of the most powerful moments, we did house meetings, you know, to learn who was experiencing it, for whom does immigration really matter to them. And there was a congregation in Stockton where they were having a house meeting, and a congregant said that her husband had been deported, sent to Mexico, and their kids in their Hebrew school didn't know if they'd ever see their father again. So it wasn't all us. It was mostly not us. It was mostly the Latino folks in California, but it wasn't not us. Yeah. And our suffering, our lives were touched too, and we had, I mean, again, you know, there's so many issues of class here, and so I just think it's important that we talk about them openly. Our communities, our families had folks working in their homes or raising their kids or, you know, who were undocumented immigrants. They loved those people. Those people were part of their families. We could not talk about that because it's awkward, or we could talk about that and say, I guess we need to partner and figure out how to play our role and do our job here. Mm-hmm. And so that has been what I've been trying to do, sort of, what does it look like if we organize the mainstream Jewish, often white, not always white, or maybe we look white, but we don't feel that white as Jews in this country, as Islamophobia and racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry and xenophobia and all of these things have come to light so much. Like, they've always existed, and now we actually get to talk about them out loud. As these things become really on the table, what role is the Jewish community going to play? What are we going to say? What are we going to do? How are we going to show up powerfully? What risks are we going to take? What risks are we going to take financially, with our bodies? How are we going to show up in ways that are surprising, maybe, hopefully? How are we going to challenge ourselves to live our values in the public square? And so there are so many ways that we have learned. There are mistakes we've made along the way, and those failures have, you know, certainly let us talk differently about racism. You know, we've made all sorts of, oh man, it's easy to screw up on these issues, but it's easier to not take the risk. So at least, you know, we want to talk about it. We want to say stupid things so that Jackie could say to me, like, Steph, let's talk. Let's figure this out again. And so a lot of what we've been doing in California, we ran this immigration campaign, and then we ran a campaign on affordable housing, and then on racial profiling. And then I moved to New York and work at Central Synagogue, which is a good buddy synagogue of Middle. And we just worked on raising the age. We were one of two states in this country that were treating 16 and 17-year-olds in our criminal justice system as if they're adults, and they are not adults. And so we worked in partnership with Middle and all, you know, people of faith around New York, and the governor, and Assembly, you know, the leader of the Assembly, Hasty, and Senator Flanagan and Senator Klein. And we had some relationships there that led us into some meetings that hadn't happened before. I feel proud of that. But I also feel very humbled that maybe we could actually play our part and stand with people across lines of race, class, and faith to actually make a difference. And so I think it's a lot about building power to make the change in the world that we want to see done, you know, disrupt, but also, you know, the prayer that we do in our sanctuaries here and at Central and across New York, and truly across this country, it's important because we have to take care of ourselves spiritually, But if it doesn't change us when we walk out of these doors, then what are we doing in our houses of worship?
Yeah. I love that. So Genesis using personal artistic power, and you, Stephanie, talking about growing a power base. Beautiful. Aunjanue, what you been doing?
I guess it's like three things that I want to kind of speak to, and I'm gonna piggyback on what the last thing that you said. I didn't know my grandfather. I was 3 years old when he passed away. I only know him by legend. And his legend is that he allowed freedom riders to come have meetings at his church. And because he did that, his church was bombed, Society Hill Baptist Church. And I only recently saw pictures of this, I guess about 2 years ago, that I saw the actual, the church has been rebuilt, but the picture of the church, the original church that was bombed. I came to live with my grandmother when I was 3 years old, and I would say from the time that I was 3, and I was going to church 3 times a week. No, anything about that? Yeah. No. Going to church 3 times a week until I went to college. I never once heard my pastor say anything about civic engagement, anything about civil rights, anything about justice, anything about none of those things. Whereas his predecessor almost lost his life because of that. So that was incredibly odd to me, and it still is very odd to me. There seems to be a sort of silence, a blanket of silence, a cloak of silence, velvet silence that's sort of set on the Black church, specifically in the South, when it comes to our responsibility about these issues. Genesis and I have a different approach. We both are very, very passionate about that freaking flag. What Genesis has done is sort of take an insular approach, and her work, I don't want to speak for you, but I think has sort of like, I'm going to do the work here in Mississippi to change minds and change lives. My approach has been, I believe and I know that flag is not a problem for Mississippi, it is a problem for the United States of America. Because we sit back and allow it to happen. Just because it happens in the, whatever parallel Mississippi exists on, does not mean it's not in the United States. I want to tell you, Mississippi is a part of the United States of America. I know you want to believe it's a foreign country. I know you want to believe that it's somewhere in the third world, and I have been treated as such many times, but it is in the United States of America. So here's the problem. When we say that is a Mississippi problem, what ends up happening is we ignore the fact that flag flies in DC all over the place. All over the place. If you go, anybody in here been in Union Station? Raise your hands if you've ever been to Union Station, travel out of Union Station. You've walked by that Confederate flag. All of you did. All of you did. That's your responsibility. You cannot be outraged at what happened in South Carolina and get mad after those people died in South Carolina, but then when you are in the presence of it, you say nothing. You cannot do that. It is not moral, it is not responsible, I'm sorry, it's wrong. And passivity is participation. It just is. So what I have done is I have sort of taken whatever opportunity I could get that's been offered me or whatever, and I've spoken to this in very, very public ways. One of the things that I did last year is I was on the red carpet several times for different events, and I wore dresses that one of them said, "Take it down, Mississippi." One of them said, "Take it down, Mississippi," and the other one said, "President Obama, take it down." Now, these are just, they were like,
That's disruption.
yeah,
Disruption.
right. They weren't the cutest dresses in the world. They didn't win me any fashion, what do you call those? Yeah, exactly. I wasn't getting none of that. However, I spoke my mind, I spoke my heart, because the way I see it, I don't care about no red carpet. If I'm gonna be on a red carpet, I'm gonna say something. And at that point, Mississippi was about to decide whether they would keep the flag or not. So I wanted to put my little voice up in there and say something about it. So that's why I wore those dresses. And if I ever get another opportunity, you will see me wearing another one of those dresses. So what we have been doing, Genesis is a part of this now. We've come together in this very serendipitous sort of way, is to stretch that even further. This idea of take it down America that we've kind of, hashtagging or whatever. We have a little not a website, but we have a Facebook page, and it's called Take It Down America. And that's our goal. Our goal is to expand this conversation about this flag to a national one, which is what it should be. It should be a national discussion about race in this country and how we sit back and do nothing. And I do not believe we have to have massacres to make us do the right thing. So, two more points. We had a conversation, Reverend Jackie and I and a couple of lovely women. We were talking about revising the Freedom Rider campaign and doing another kind of disruption. Now, we've had these bus rides and that kind of thing like that, but we are trying to figure out how do we approach this from a different way? And for me, this national discussion about this flag and what it means to this country, and also confronting the church, confronting the black church, confronting the southern churches. And what are you saying in these pulpits? You are wasting your time if you're not speaking about justice, if you're not speaking about violence. You're wasting your time. I have been to churches the week after Newtown happened. I went to a white church, white Southern church, Southern Baptist church, and they were so defensive. They were so defensive. They didn't say anything about those kids dying at all. All they cared about is, we don't need our guns taken away. Like, what about the hunters? Like, this is what they were saying days after those babies died. So what I believe is we have to confront that. Yes. We have to confront that and remind folks of what morality is and the responsibility of being church folks is. So, these are questions. I haven't figured it out, and which is why I'm glad to, be here. But that's what I've been trying to do, and that's what I want to be involved in making happen.
Yes.
Aunjanue, I want to come back to this, but if I don't say it to you, I will forget. I was working on my sermon last week, and I was reading a CNN story. Came out maybe April 24. I made a copy of it for y'all. Georgia or Alabama? Alabama decided to call their Confederate Flag Day state holiday. Just nice, tidy little state holiday. That's how they're keeping it, but not because they don't really want to let it go. So instead of calling it Confederate Flag Day, it's just called state holiday because it celebrates states' rights. Right. Not the wild, right? So let's come. Kind of subversive. We'll come back to that. Right. Charles, what you been doing?
I had knee surgery.
Oh, good.
Not fun. But South Carolina, the flag, we've been dealing with. They only removed it when they were massacred in Charleston. So I grew up with that. I think what you're saying too. I came from a family of activists, and my mom, I would fly home. I was living in California then. I would go home. I would literally rent a car, drive into the driveway, get in, put my bag in the house, and my mother would say, "Get in the car, we're going to protest the flag." And I would have to get in the car. I was like, "Mom, I just flew 6 hours," you know, and I would have to get in, and we would go to Columbia. This was 20 years ago. This was 30 protesting this, fighting this. And I always wondered then, you know, should I be in politics? Should I be a minister? Should I do all this work to try and fight issues, to fight things? And I realized that as an artist, that's what I get to do. And what I get to do especially is when you do something huge or that a lot of crowds come to or that's commercial, you can be subversive and slide things in without people realizing what it is. Until weeks later, they discover, wait a minute, they talked about this. And it's something in my work I've always tried to do. I've always tried to have some kind of message that, if it's not religious, it's spiritual. And recently, I've been directing a TV series that takes place in a Southern megachurch. So, I mean, that was perfect for me. But it was this one. I have a clip of something that just aired, and it was this one episode where the choir director is gay. Surprise! And the church had no problem with that until the choir director got married.
So we're going to show that?
Yes, and so once the choir director got married, the board of the church, they were all in an uproar, and they were very upset. And so what happens is that the lady of the church, played by Lynn Whitfield, who is astounding, she has to fire the choir director. And we shot this scene, and literally the crew applauded at the end of the scene, which does not happen, as you well know. But to be able to have a TV series on the air, it's on OWN, on Oprah's channel, that deals with issues within the Black church, which is so important to deal with. And
what's the name of the
especially
series, babe? What's the name of it?
Let's see it.
What's the name of the series?
The series called Green Leaf. Oh, good.
Good morning, Lady May.
Good morning.
You wanted to see me?
Yes, sit over there.
Oh, thank you.
Kolin, let me start by saying what a wonderful addition your Ministry of Music has been here at Calvary.
Thank you.
And I want you to know that if you ever need a personal reference from me...
Oh, that's what this is.
I'm afraid so. I'm sure you know that we've been going through some financial issues that we couldn't have foreseen last year. And so we've had to look hard for cuts. And unfortunately, the music ministry is one of those areas.
That is unfortunate.
And since you were the last person hired in the department, well, you know the rest.
I do, actually. Quite well. May I ask you a question?
Of course.
Do you think gay marriage is wrong? Because you knew I was gay when Charity hired me, so all this has got to be about Reggie and I getting married.
I believe what the Bible says about marriage and sexual immorality.
But what about what it says about love? Or not sitting in the seat of the scornful, or being in judgment?
Listen, because I believe what the Bible says doesn't mean I don't love you. Doesn't mean that I am sitting in judgment of you. This is purely a financial decision.
For the record, I don't believe you, but I love you. And I will pray for the broken part in you that has to believe that there was a broken part in me. Thank you.
So when I got the script and saw that, I thought, when do you get an opportunity to do that? For so many people who will see that, and that one little conversation or that one thing that they see may change them.
Yeah.
It may make them realize, and it may not happen right away. So how do we, in our work, in our churches find that way to touch something. And a lot of times, if it's overt, it doesn't happen. What are the different ways? And I believe in it being overt as well. But how do you get to do that? And I was so proud of this, that we get to do work like this on television, where everyone watches. And especially in that Oprah world, it's like, all the women who watch this, and men, the fact that we can say a certain thing. And then when you do, I'm just a real advocate of permission. I was very fortunate, as I said, growing up in a family that gave me that told me I could knock down doors and do what I had to do and protest every 2 minutes, But, many kids don't get that. Right. And I feel that it's also, as artists, our responsibility to give them that permission that they can go and do and be and try. And, I directed Motown the musical, and we were touring, and it was in St. Louis. And I found out that it was going there, and we were literally in St. Louis in the middle of the Mike Brown trial. Yeah. And they didn't know if they were going to have shows or not. Every day they would have to call in and see, are we going? And I didn't know, because the show was touring everywhere, so I didn't know that it was there. And I found out the show was there, and I said, I'm coming. And the press people were like, oh God, because they knew I was going to get on every TV station, which I did. I didn't wear an outfit, but I would have if I could have, So I called and I said, I want to take students to see this musical. Now the Fox Theater, I don't know if anybody's from St. Louis, the Fox Theater has 4,000 seats. Wow. 4,000 seats. I mean, there was the Michael Jackson, one was light-skinned and one was dark-skinned, and I couldn't tell which one was on. That's how big that theater is, It was like, my God. So I said, I want to take students, and the theater said, oh, we have outreach programs. I hate that word, first of all. We have outreach programs. I said, no, you have the one black kid who's in the drama program, in the art school, and you have the 2 Asian kids who are in the orchestra, and somebody like that, it's that, right? That's what you think is outreach. I said, I want kids from Ferguson and Normandy to see this show. And they had no idea how to reach them. 15 minutes away. And so through a friend of mine, Gwen Eiffel, oh my God, who's amazing, Gwen called PBS locally, PBS called the principals called the teachers, and I took 200 students to see their first show, And they had never seen a show before. They had never had that experience. And I remember the teachers weeping because we had this big talk back and saying this is the first time they'd seen these students smile. Because they're bombarded by all this negativity. And when I went where Mike Brown was, where he was murdered, that neighborhood is a middle-class neighborhood. Yes. The way you saw it on the news, it looked like ghetto. It looked like this whole other thing. I couldn't believe the images that I'd seen and then the people that I met and these incredible students and I saw in their eyes that I changed them that day because they looked at me and saw, wait a minute, I could do that. Yeah. I could be that. And so I'm very aware, as you are, and I know you are, that I need to have people see me. There's so few of us that get to do what we do. And if I'm in a situation, they need to see that so they also can go, wait a minute, I can do that. I can be that.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. So I want to just give you guys a chance to talk to each other. Like you give a response, ask a question, and then we're going to turn out here and ask the audience to talk. Does that work?
To do that and be that, to give them that option in that mind, it's shaping a reality, it's shaping a world, it's creating a new world. And you spoke about it in your sermon today about that vision, the power of imagination. And I can imagine that I can do this. And that's something that as a child was given to me at a very early age. And I thought to everybody for a long time. I thought, you just assume people kind of grow up the same.
Right.
And it wasn't until around middle school or high school I was like, these people are laughing at my visions. Like, why? Like, I couldn't comprehend why it was so outlandish to say I'm going to do this and I'm going to be this to a lot of my peers. But that's why. They didn't have the inception, that seed planted in them early. So that's another thing I'm extremely passionate about is the young folk, the youth, and bridging that gap and empowering them to see wow, Genesis, she came from our neighborhood, from these circumstances, and she's doing this,
Right.
and she's back here talking to us. We must be worth it. We must be special, you know? And you can see it in their eyes when that moment happens, where it's like, I could be that. I could be more than that. Mm-hmm. The creating of worlds is a beautiful thing to witness.
Also,
I think that's
too,
a
just,
disruption. That's beautiful.
Well,
Go try.
even like this morning, I don't know if everyone was in service. The thing that I know we also often talk about, what can you do in your churches? When you two read scripture today, you know, just that energy of the different energies coming together for that. You feel that. You don't know what it is that you feel, but it was something that I just loved about that, because very different styles and energies and looks, and it was just the scriptures for all of us. Because a lot of times when the church that I used to attend no one looked like me anymore at that church. And I was like, I need something that feels like me, how do I get that? And I love that this morning in the midst of the amazing, everything else, the music and all that. I thought something so simple can be very profound.
Next time we're going to rap it, right?
No.
Next time we're going to some beats. No, we can't do
But
that.
Jackie, didn't you teased her? Remember she was talking about how she's gonna rap?
I'm going to do that.
Do it now,
I think
Jackie.
you need to.
Do it now.
Just saying.
Yeah, come on. Here we go.
Wait, you got your mic. We need to disrupt this thing. We need to confound this thing. We need to fix it. We need to tweak it. We need to move it. We need to shake it up.
Exactly.
That was great. I found my new hype man. My new hype man.
Oh, Lord. What I wanted to say seriously was actually...
That was it.
That was
That was amazing.
But I preached the same sermon twice, and when you're off book, you don't say exactly the same thing. So middle people didn't get to hear me say what I said at 9:30. I wish you had been here. Prayer is not enough. I want to come back to your kind of critique of the church, the black church, the churches, period, the churches. I said prayer is not enough. Something to disrupt, to me, the status quo is, and I'm getting right back to you guys, is for religion and religious people to stop acting like our religiosity is enough. Mm-hmm. It's really not. And I really, really love me some church, and I love God, the way I think of the goodness in the universe, but it's not enough. I think what ends up happening is we think, well, we'll just pray about that. So we have to do about that. Mm-hmm. That's all. I just want to toss that in. Yeah, we got to do.
Right. So in the Jewish tradition, there's a text that says that you're not allowed to pray in a space that doesn't have windows. Huh. Right, so that you need to pray. We need to sustain our souls. We need to be in community with each other. We need to access and talk with God or something bigger than ourselves. But we can't do it in an enclosed space where we can't see the outside world. There's a text that says, prayer in and of itself is a good thing, but unless the words cause you to transform your life and change how you act in the world, then it hasn't completed its mission. Exactly. And so, I think, people of faith sitting up here and sitting here are responsible for our souls, caring for them, caring for each other. People grieve all the time. People have losses all the time. We're not just a place that sends people out into the world, because we need the anchor of community and kindness and compassion and the love that we embody in the words and the study and all that we do and the work that we do. And then there's a window out there that causes us to gaze, outward and upward. And I think that's what you create here, and what I've heard, what you are creating.
Oh, I just took
your...
this. I'm sorry, I had to write that down.
Oh, right on.
Sorry.
What you're creating in all of your work is creating sanctuaries with windows. And I guess I wonder, as you talk about making sure the flag comes down, that's one window. Out one window, you're here. You are praying or living or you're nurturing your spiritual life. And then you look out the window, and there's this damn flag flying there that is insulting to your very being and soul and existence. What happens when? Because you're going to win, right? You're going to win. That's it.
Absolutely.
Right? You're going to win.
Absolutely.
The world is moving towards freedom. That's just, the arc of justice is bending and all of those things. So you're going to win, and one day you're going to, thank God, look out the window and the flag won't be waving outside that window anymore. I'm just so curious, because of the power that you bring into this world, what's out the next window? What's next? Like, when you look out the next window that you have to move on and do something about. And I know you said so beautifully that this is about expanding the conversation to be a conversation about race in the entire country. So I guess I'm wondering what's out your windows.
I just want to speak to that briefly. People think that that the flag is just a symbol, and I get so aggravated and disheartened because when these conversations happen, they get into these discussions about the historical la da da la la la, and it's just, it's just sounding symbol. It doesn't mean anything. It's just nothing. It's verbiage. It's all it is. Empty language. The history of that flag is really not that important to me, to be honest with you. I understand the heritage angle, but heritage is shared. It's not just your heritage, it's my heritage as well. So you think about what your ancestors were doing, I'm thinking about what your ancestors were doing to my ancestors. So that's that. But here's the thing, that flag is not a symbol, it is a directive to take life. And that's how you have to look at it. It is a directive to take life. One of our comrades in Mississippi was saying that and one of the things that we are actively doing is trying to get the ACLU to deem that flag as hate speech, because they are slow to do it. They don't have the courage to do it. So we are going to push to get them to do that, so we can have some cases, or court cases, so we can win this thing. But anyway, one of the things that she said, it's like that flag is like saying fire in a movie theater when there is no fire. It does something. It did something to Dylann Roof. It made Dylann Roof go into a church and kill people. Beyond that. So when I say so it's not just a flag coming down. It's the ending of a directive to take and maim and terrorize American life. Right. But the other thing about that is, the next part of that is, there is a sort of sustained terrorizing of kids in Mississippi, of students, of children in Mississippi, because they walk under that flag every day to go to school. And even though nobody is saying that flag says you should be a slave, you think that don't do something to their minds?
Yes, right.
Because it not only is it a directive to take life, but it is also an educational directive. It is also an economic directive. And these things have affected Mississippi generationally, and will continue to affect Mississippi and a whole bunch of other states generationally if we don't stop it. If we don't stop it, it affects the quality of education that these kids have in Mississippi. Yes. So this is just a starting point for me, and for Genesis. It's like this. So this is what this flag means. This is what this flag does. So this is why we got to get rid of it, and then we can start having this discussion about, you got to teach these black kids that they are the masters of the universe. You have to, because now they feel like minions.
You have to.
They feel like minions. They feel like they're nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. Don't you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. I just came from Mississippi in February, and I have a story to tell that's piggybacking right off of that, because what's out the window is them, the children. Not just Mississippi children, all children, but I'll speak about Mississippi children because they don't have this platform to speak. I went to an alternative school in Gulfport, Mississippi. It's kind of where I grew up, in Biloxi, Gulfport, Gulf Coast. All black, all impoverished. Maybe not all, but let's make that assumption for now. And they wanted me to go and speak to them about the power of spoken word. So I walk into this building, there's metal detectors, security. I'm like, okay. I'm at this alternative school, about ages 14, 15, 16. And before I go into the classroom, there's the director there, a lovely woman who brought me in, and I'm really thankful that she did. But she goes, okay, so we're gonna have you on this wing. This wing are the less problematic kids. This wing is I can't remember the exact words she used, but it was to the effect the really bad kids. I'm like, okay, so why am I in this wing? Those kids need to hear what I'm about to say more.
Exactly.
So can we get those kids to come to this wing?
Yeah.
And she goes, oh, like she was taken aback, and she goes, well, I'd have to check, with the principal. We can't do it today because we already have you scheduled, but, let me talk to him while you're in there and see. So I do this amazing, there's 4 or 5 kids in this room, but there's a whole alternative school worth of kids that I could be speaking to at this time. It's all good, these kids, I want to reach them as well. And they're kids, they're insecure teenagers, barely want to speak up and say their names. They're kids. I got cousins their age, nieces and nephews their age. So by the end of the time I get done speaking with them, their eyes are open. They say, well, we want to put our spoken word, our poems to a beat now because, they saw me rap or whatnot. And I read each one of their poems and gave them a critique and told them what I loved specifically about that train of thought of that specific poem. And they beamed. They walked out of there beaming. It was a beautiful experience. I finished with them. I give them all my information. I always do that. I'm accessible. Reach out if you need anything. I walk out, and the director's there, and she said, oh, we spoke to the principal, and he said that we can't allow you to do it because there were 3 arrests last week, and we fear for your safety. We fear for your safety. I've done work in Harlem, Brownsville, alternative schools. There was a riot in one while I was doing my presentation. Nothing they can do will scare me. I got so frustrated and flustered. And this woman told me, yeah, there's one group of kids that we just keep in a room. There's no windows.
Yeah.
They're just too disruptive and too dangerous for the rest. And I
Damn.
school to prison pipeline in
my
my
face.
face.
Right here.
In my face.
They're already in jail.
And they're criminals in their eyes already. They have the guise of wanting to help them and, reach them and, bring a few people in here and there for the good kids. But these are criminals to them. And when the school let out, I waited in the parking lot and there was a few kids who came out and I started rapping, talking to them. And I said, and that's what I told them. I was like, I learned something today, y'all. Did y'all know that in the eyes of a lot of people, you are criminals already because you couldn't sit still in some other school, so now you're here. They've already removed you from society in a way.
Yes.
And the next step is to remove you in another way. You're not stupid, you're not disruptive, you don't have behavioral issues. You're just probably mad creative and that stuff is boring you.
Yes.
Or, you're dealing with something deep in here that where you feel you need to act out or have negative attention. You're not criminals. And I just wanted to say that to them because I couldn't get to them.
Yeah.
So that's what's out the window, is understanding how institutionally young brown and black bodies are being treated and raised and cultivated as criminal bodies. So that for me, as a hip-hop artist, is someone who prides myself on being able to reach them in such a powerful way. That is the next step, to try to dismantle that shit, because that is some other shit.
Right on. Yeah. That's awesome.
Jackie, also on that, about the flag especially, because the flag is gone from South Carolina, but it's still there. And that's the thing, that even though it may not be flying, we may not see it every day, I still see it. I still feel it. What we have to do, especially in the church, is start with younger, with and older. We all have to deal with what that feels like. Even though we made, because it's like when Obama became president. Oh, you have a black president now, everything's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all those things, the energy that we have. How do you shift that? That's the disruptive part of that. And so just because something is taken down and gone, it doesn't mean that it's not still there.
That flag is inside all of us.
Yes.
That flag is inside all of us. And I want to turn out to the audience now and make a segue comment to say that I got to cast this conference, you know? And I cast this panel to be brown and Jewish on purpose. Thank you, Stephanie. But I did that, and we had Zainab Salbi yesterday on a panel. I did that because I don't want us to forget that this is a conference about racism. I don't think you did, but I wanted to extrovert a little bit that the things that are the activism we're doing, the work we're doing, is centered in and around the fundamental flaw of racism in the United States of America, the construct of race in the United States of America, and the construct that creates all kinds of ways for us to other each other. So you heard us, so Stephanie looks white and she's Jewish. And anti-Semitism is on a rise in the United States and around the globe.
Yes.
Genesis is a biracial person, father Muslim, mother white. Can I say that? She is a black person.
My mother was Muslim also.
Muslim also. So Muslim parents, black, biracial person. Black in America. No, don't matter. Half of her is white? No, black in America. Aunjanue and I are chocolatey black women from Mississippi. Holla. And I say that to say, my black Mississippi, chocolatey black, poor, didn't go to high school parents, dealt with racism and colorism and economic injustice. Do you understand how I'm trying to complexify the narrative? And Charles's southern black, Geechee, yeah. These are the stories that are important for us to know, and for each one of us, and for each one of you, there's thousands, millions of people whose personal narratives make this work mission critical. Does that make sense? Okay, let's hear from you.
Hi, it's Susan. I thought, Aunjanue, you were amazing in Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
The Nat Turner story, which was eye-opening and new. How, for all of us, how do you see us rebirthing this nation?
That's a great question. Aunjanue, how do you like that question?
Take a breath. Take a breath.
Somebody
She was
escort her
brilliant,
out.
though, right?
Susan.
Escort her out.
That's a great question.
I'm sure you guys are, well, maybe you don't. You're aware of the controversy that surrounded Birth of a Nation. And my point of view then and my point of view now is that I believe fervently that black art ensures black survival. I'm a broken record when it comes to this. When we were singing We Shall Overcome, we weren't singing because we liked how it sounded. We weren't singing because we were trying to soothe our souls. We were singing because we needed to know where we were. And if people are singing, you can know where their location is. So it kept us from getting assaulted. It kept us from getting killed. Singing We Shall Overcome did that. There are examples and examples and examples of that, how art has specifically played into black survival. Because we live in the country that we live in, and it seems to be that at least in classrooms all over this country, there is a directive to suppress information, to suppress history about black folks. So 9 times out of 10, most folks in America don't even know who Nat Turner is. They don't know that he was responsible before Lincoln of trying to rid slavery from this country. So I believe that the value in that movie went well beyond its director, and that it still has value, and I still want all of you to see it.
So good.
That story was not about Nate Parker, it was about Nat Turner.
Amen.
I'm not excusing Nate Parker's actions. I do believe and I'm sorry, but I'm going there. You asked the question. I do believe that we have to have disruptive classrooms. And art will always be better than the artist. Always be better than the artist. And it is the artist's job, to frustrate you. Zadie Smith said this. She held up a book. She said, this book will always be better than me. Always be better than me. That is the job of an artist. An artist can be a scoundrel, but he or she can create something astounding that can change the world. And we, as people who are socially minded, we have to figure out how we are going to, because this is going to happen again. There's going to be another scoundrel who's going to make a great piece of work of art that could change us. How are we going to deal with that? Destroying it is not the answer.
Amen.
So having said that, I hope that the work that I'm trying to do, and so many folks are doing in Mississippi, Genesis and other folks, we are actually hoping to do something at NYU, perhaps in the fall, which sort of speaks to this idea of what I'm trying to do. I've been thinking about and kind of combining our efforts of making this discussion about this flag, about a greater discussion about social justice as it pertains as race articulates itself into this country, a national one. I want folks in DC to get mad about that flag hanging at Union Station. Get mad about it and do something about it. And I think that, like I said, passivity is participation. That when we all get riled up about these things that are happening in different parts of our country, because, we have a president who preaches divisiveness. So if we sort of, well, this happens in Mississippi, this happens in Louisiana, that happens in Florida, that happens in South Carolina, that ain't got nothing to do with me. The devil is a liar. And sort of like bridging all of these efforts. There was what is the bill called, Genesis, the Religious Liberty Bill?
Religious Freedom Act?
The Religious Freedom Act, yes. Okay, the Religious Freedom Act that was passed, and it was discrimination against gay and lesbians and LGBTQ people in Mississippi. We got to combine those efforts. Our folks who want to get rid of the flag need to combine efforts with the LGBT community and combine those efforts. And everybody in here who sees those points, and you talked about that, who sees those points of connection where we can get together, and bridging these gaps. That's my notion of rebirthing.
What time do you have? I have 3:17, is that right? Okay, so I like that you directed your question to someone. If you could do that, that helps us to get to maybe a couple more. Okay, let's go.
So maybe it's for you, Jackie, because one of the things, speaking of disruption, that happened yesterday that I realized after being in this space since Friday is I needed to be with only people of color. And when I said that to, I will just say white man, I'm not going to name his name. We had an interesting interaction because I said, because another black woman said, oh, tell me what it is. And I said, well, you can come with us. She said, no, because I'm co-leading one of the groups. And then I said, well, no, you don't have to. Your co-partner will do it. And then we kind of had a little bit of a quick disagreement about caucusing. And he said something to the effect of, well, I'm with white people all the time. And I'm thinking, well, if you don't like being with white people all the time, what do you think it is for us? And so I think with all due respect, I think if we're going to talk about disruption and self-care, we did end up having a people of color group. It interestingly ended up being about 6 or 7 women of color, women identified of color only, so no men identified folks came. And it was powerful. And I think part of our disruption and self-care, and what my invitation to white folks is, let us have that space and learn to decenter yourselves. And maybe next year we could have that space.
Thank you so much for that. I will answer quickly because I want to hear from them, Aisha. I think it's important. I think it's important to have caucuses. I do. And I think it's important to have multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic moments. I really do. I think that there are times, Alice Walker would say, or Jesus did, where you just kind of come out from amongst the other thing, right? And Alice Walker says, we believe in being with all the people all the time except for Sunday. But you don't need to, except for resting, right? So a black girl married to a white man, I think most of you know that. So I just why I went to get my nails done yesterday. I'm just kidding. Sometimes you just have to step out. a little bit and be with each other and kind of kick it around. White people, black people, Latino people, I think. My opinion. Let's ask the next question to someone else. Thank you. Thanks, Aisha.
Thank you, panel. My question has to do with a couple of points I think, Aunjanue, you made, and Charles, so I think maybe it's to you, Charles. When you were talking about, you were earlier talking about the subtlety of interjecting messages and getting them in there. It's an easy way to absorb it, then all of a sudden people get it. But I was really struck by the point that you were making about going out to the schools, because sometimes people have to see people like themselves actually doing the work. So it seems, I won't say easier, but you have more of a vehicle when you're in the arts in terms of doing that. But for those of us who aren't in the arts that are doing that type of work, sometimes it's a little more difficult. I was raised in an environment on the west side of Chicago where my parents' whole thing, other than being successful, was being safe and being invisible to protect yourself. So, I mean, did you ever go through something like that as an artist and then realize, you know what, I can't do that. I need to step out there to be a bit more visible. Sometimes there's personal risks there, but growing up with this thing about wondering they're going to come and get you and then stepping out is kind of difficult at times. So can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Thanks, John.
Well, every day, every single day you wonder, I would like to go out and not fight one day. I would like to go out and not feel like that a door was open to me, that I didn't have to kick it down. So sometimes you don't want to get out of bed because of that. Sometimes you think, do I have to constantly fight? But then you see something on the news, you hear something, and you feel it's what I have to do. It's why I come to middle. You know, a lot of times I'll think, oh, I don't want to go to good church today because I'm in that pity party. Like when I hurt my knee, I was like, you get in that pity party and you feel, because I know if I come to middle, I'm going to feel better. And sometimes you don't want to feel better. You want to stay in the darkness, right? And when you find something like this place that brings joy in the middle of darkness, that brings light to you, you can't walk out those doors and not try and change and do something. So I think everyone has something that they do that means something. I mean, kids, first of all, your voice, number one. Anytime you speak, you know, we always use you because it's like that voice. You may not think, some little kid who has a low voice, you know, that changed too early, like them hearing you, it shifts them. You never know what your power, you never know what that is, that person that you talk to that was about to do something very drastic or dramatic in their lives, and something you said to them at church, walking out the door, back there, what that means. And that's why I love this place so much and wish we had this place everywhere, because then our world would change. And
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you, love. I'm going to ask you guys, we're not going to get to everybody, so I'm going to ask you to say your question as quickly as you can so we can get to as many of you as you can. Please? Okay.
First, thank you, panel. So I'm reminded of Valerie Kaur's introduction from Friday. She speaks about care of the self, outreach to others, but also outreach to the opponent. So my question is, this panel has been about partnership primarily, and this last question is about self-care. Talk to us a little bit about how you do outreach to the opponents.
Steph, can you take that one? Thank you.
I'm not sure there's a more important thing for us to try to figure out how to do right now. We are so divided. You know, we're so good right now at othering, especially in this administration. We, you know, the middle of the country to the edges of the country, people who have wealth, people who don't have that wealth. Just, it's so easy to demonize that person who believes something different than you do. And I think there's real opportunity there to take risk, but it will never happen accidentally. I think we're learning that over and over again. So, you know, one of the things we're actually trying to do at Central Synagogue is just create groups of people. We have people who've voted very differently in the last election in our congregation, and who share similar values, and who will never talk to each other. So I think the lesson that I would bring out there is we need to proactively create spaces for people to say hard things to each other. A mentor of mine talks about standing in the fire. what does it look like to get in a really hard conversation and say, this is what I believe, but this is why I believe it. Let me tell you this story, because I was a kid once, and this is what I was taught, and this is what matters to me, and this is what my parents thought was important, and here's how I experienced being bullied for X, Y, and Z one day. Because you can't deny somebody's experience or disagree with their story, all you could do is hold their story and hear their story and look at them and see their humanity. Creating spaces where people get into conversation with each other, the people who could not be more different from each other, but desire coming and seeing each other's humanity. And I think as people of faith, if we can figure out how to do that, even if it takes us flying groups of our congregation and your congregation to the middle of the country and having a conversation with people in the church or synagogue there, to see that they're human, they love their children, they have aging parents, they're hurting for lots of reasons, and as are we, and just start from there. I'm thinking about, our nun on the bus.
Yes. Sister Simone.
Sister Simone Campbell, who went to both conventions, the Democratic and Republican conventions, and brought lemonade and nuns. And when you bring lemonade and nuns, people will talk to you.
Yes.
And she asked people, why are you anti-immigrant? Tell me, how has immigration hurt you and your family? And then just didn't judge their answer. And that's a really hard question to ask somebody with that kind of compassion in your heart. But maybe we can do that. Maybe we can ask those questions and actually listen to each other. So I think that's one way of coming at this moment.
Thank you, Steph.